Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff, and I am so excited about today's guest. Chris and I, we've talked about probably doing this for probably a year now, I'm going to say, and we're finally doing it. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here with us. Before we begin, can you just share with us a little bit about your background, how you came to be kind of where you are, which is focused on campus planning and utilization or space utilization in higher ed?
Sure, and thanks for having me, and kudos to us for our patience, uh, and we made it happen. So I think I've learned the best way to explain what I do is to say that I previously was the director of scheduling and space management at Rutgers University, and I moved into a consulting role on my own. And so what I do, whatever I do, my goal is always to offer up the kinds of things I wish were available when I was on staff, but they weren't, right? Really niche targeted stuff, maybe a small project, maybe a project that's this odd combination of things, right? But that we needed to move the ball forward. And there aren't always uh, the resources out there that you wish. So I try to sort of have that mindset. And what I do in practice, much of my work is campus master planning, space utilization studies, building, visioning, and programming. So sort of at the building level, kind of what needs to go in the building, what functions should be served there. And then within that, I would say I have not a focus, but do work on classrooms. And that includes classroom planning, but also course scheduling. And I think the one thing that I realized working at Rutgers and have continued to bring to clients is that, you want to plan your spaces, but there really, I think, is an underemphasis on the scheduling and the allocation of spaces, right? In an inventory level view, what should my classroom look like? It's like, well, the question is more, you have 100 of them. What should they look like as an inventory?
Mm.
And, you could have as we all know, you could have a great space that is underutilized. And sometimes often the answer isn't building, it's better scheduling. So I try to bring that mentality and an awareness that isn't just a one and done, but it's like an ongoing process that people need to commit to, like after I walk away.
It's fascinating to me because it's coming up a lot in conversations. I'm doing accreditation reviews and things like that. And as we walk around these campuses, they're like, well, we had originally planned to use this space for this, but we're growing so much that now we're having to shuffle. It seems like I hear a lot of, oh yeah, I've had to move my classroom 4 times this year already. We had to shuffle our classroom midterm. Oh, we had this plan for this space, but we have to do something otherwise. It seems like a lot of the conversations lately is we are having to constantly live in a flex world of moving our space and making it work for us. So I wonder, when did you, I'm just now kind of becoming aware of space and scheduling and how conflicting, or how limiting it is. When did you kind of first become aware of what this type of big issue was?
Sure. And I'll say that this conversation is somewhat, I will oversimplify it somewhat. For example, I'm assuming the semester system, right? And some schools are increasingly thinking of how to break out of the semester system. For certain students, they might not be able to be free every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 from, late January to early May. But let's just assume that for kind of simplicity. And then, you would have to layer on all those emerging trends. But I think the trick is this. And it comes down to, we're really not the unit of analysis, so to speak. The focus is not the spaces. The focus is the experience in the spaces. And so it's matching the person, the activity, the course to the right space. So that's a planning, design, and scheduling thing, as you suggest. And so it's understanding that. And I actually gave a presentation 2 years ago at the Society for College and University Planning annual meeting. And it was like, do we because what you want your classrooms to do, right, in the end, is to support the teaching and learning that you're
Yep.
striving for at your university, right? But but what you also have to do on the fly, because course scheduling happens on the fly, right? You got to get it done. You got to publish the schedule of classes. People have to register. Then downstream from that is financial aid. Downstream from that is billing, right? So all this scheduling happens under the gun. So you have this ideal that nobody would dispute, which is the proper space for the pedagogy and the student experience. But then on the fly, you've got to take in all this information from all the academic departments about what their sections are, what their section sizes are, and so forth. And so you realize that the conditions by which you're planning your stock, evaluating how things are in terms of the match, is really difficult, right? Because the basic thing is everybody in a classroom.
Yeah.
And that is a minimum thing you got to do. But I think where we'll make progress, and this is where schools just don't really have the resources dedicated to it, is to say, well, wait, and something I'll work with on campus master plans, and I'm starting to try to do this sort of independently, is almost like a postmortem. Come in, your scheduling office, your registrar probably doesn't have the time to do a postmortem on the last semester they just scheduled. That's just a big project.
Yep.
But that's the kind of thing we have to do. Because if we don't have goals, then we're not going to have success. So I hope that makes sense. I kind of sprawled a bit there, but I think that's sort of it's a sprawling issue.
I think, what you just said was so smart. I think about, my PhD. There were times where I was in a classroom with peers and I'm like, the table layout here is odd. We're breaking out into small groups, yet all of our tables face each other. And so from a small group perspective, but I just had a class last night and that classroom would have been much better for the small group breakout style. So as you start to talk about that, I am realizing that as a student, there are times where I'm like, this is an odd space for this type of class. Like, why would we be here in this class surrounded by test tubes and
Right.
chemistry kits when we're talking about, student success in higher education? Why do I need all the beakers around me?
They're to throw when you get stressed out and
Yeah.
to hear the glass break. No, and it's true. And again, I'm not claiming there's perfection. I mean, when at Rutgers, there were 300 plus general purpose classrooms, a number of other spaces that were also used, so many sections. And it's this process, right, where ideally the professor is communicating to a department chair, program director, administrator. This is kind of what I need. That itself often doesn't happen, right? Because the faculty member, they might not know what classroom is best. They might not know what to ask for. All these things, right? They might not have the time. They might not care. And I hate to say that, but there's levels of concern, right? There's a
Right.
continuum. And so that's that piece. Then after it gets communicated to some overburdened, let's say, in the end, it usually is like the assistant to the chair or something who has 100 other things to do. They've got to then wrap their heads around that for their whole department. And ideally, there's a scheduling system or something to facilitate the cataloging of desires, right? And by the way, there's also time preferences too, right? Which are maybe the number one thing you're going to hear about. And that then gets conveyed to the central scheduling office. And if you have good processes and systems, and if you have a good classroom stock that's flexible and of course things like accessible acoustically and visually and in terms of mobility, that all helps. But this all comes out in the end, and of course there's not there's a lot of separation there between what could be and what is. And the fact is it is inherently complex, but I also think it's something that can be tamed to some extent. But it's a matter of dedicating the time, and who has the time, right? The undergraduate program director has so many other things. They're scrambling for adjuncts when somebody gets sick or whatever on January 1st for the spring semester. And so that's where, when I do a campus master plan, I don't necessarily get called in to assess this fine-grained like issue with classroom utilization, which is so important, right? Because we know that classroom shape if students learn, if they fail, if they withdraw, right?
Yep.
If they spent their student loan money on an F and got nothing from it. And so when I go in for a campus master plan, a lot of times just because I have and I had to embrace, like Chris, you worked for 10 years at one of the more complicated universities in the world. I kind of just sort of know what to look for. And I'm not saying I have a magic wand, but you can move the ball, I guess. And I think the last thing I'd say is you're never going to fix anything 100%. Just move the ball. Just move the ball. All these words, transformative, game changing. This, like, I just really don't like those because it's like, how about a 10% improvement?
Oh, yes. Yep. Totally. Totally. I think higher ed philosophically, we get stuck there a lot. Like, we want it to be perfect before we go. And so then we're working on it for 5 years. And then by the time we're ready to go, it's obsolete because it's been 5 years and we now feel like it's perfect, but we're moving buildings now.
Right. And I love your curriculum stuff too, because I feel like you do that. Sorry, just to reflect back to you, your curriculum kind of thoughts and thought leadership, which is another term I don't like, as if the rest of us can't have thoughts too, right? But what you do is I think it's like a flexible framework, right? It's not like a prescriptive, perfect painting that needs to constrain us.
Totally. And but I don't know if you see this, that is the world in which I think people want to live. When I come into universities, they're like, but give us the framework. Just give us a template. And I'm like, is that because that's the system we've designed for students? Here's a rubric, here's a prompt, follow it. Here's exactly what we want you to do. And so therefore, the people in higher ed want us to do the same. Because I'm like, no, we're going to have fun. We're going to explore. We're going to dream. We're going to really figure out your student. And that's not, and maybe you have experienced something different. That's not always easy for academics to do because they're so down to like, how does this work? How does this function? Give me the blueprint and let's move forward. It's harder for them to dream about, what would it be optimally? And then how do we just move it closer there a little bit?
Yeah. And, I get that. So, like Max Weber talked about bureaucratization. And of course, bureaucratization has its role in scaling things. We're talking like sort of pre-technology because I'll change the story a bit. And so bureaucracy has its role. It's had this instrumental role in scaling education, which, is a generally good thing. It comes with costs. And so now I would also say with modern technology, we can achieve scale without as much bureaucracy, which is the beauty of technology. And so there's that, right? I get that. You got to get everything done, graded, and so that kid can, or old person, of whatever age, can walk across the stage at graduation, right? And so there are these pressures, and then then there are people gunning, right? For I'm going to complain, people who want to complain, and they're going to look for any excuse they can, right? Some deviation from uniformity. And I think therefore, and I'll stop there, that's a whole book or books, is like, is there the psychological safety and is there that narrative to say, listen, we did it this way. Let's all admit perfection will not be achieved. There's not such a thing as perfection. Should this room be warmer or hotter? I don't know. Some people, there's no such thing, right? Because there's 50 people in the room who some are comfortable at the current temperature. So how can we get to a place where it's like, listen, let's stop this fiction. And also let's stop trying, because I think that then leads to micromanaging. And my late sister, who was a 6th grade teacher, very dedicated, and her, by the end, she started teaching in the late 90s. By the end, her actions were so prescribed. That's called micromanaging. Micromanaging is bad.
Yep.
And so anyway, so I think we somehow need to get to a place where we allow for some fluidity. And again, I will stop there, other than to say that should be freeing.
I love talking to you because I'm so in agreement here that it should be freeing when we give ourselves a space to just be like, we might not get this right the first time. But our intent is there. Our intent is to make this better for the student. We want a better, and for the faculty, right? I always say it doesn't need to be for the faculty or the student. It's not an or, it's a both. A lot of times when we focus on the student, we can make improvements that also make life better for the faculty as well. But just knowing, like, we don't have to get it perfect. We can, dare I say, guess. We can make a really educated guess on what we think would be best for the situation, try it out for a semester, and if it doesn't work, then guess what? No, like, we can try something different next semester.
And yeah, and like, what if we just get it mostly good, right? Mostly good. Students are taking 120 for a bachelor's credits, and who cares if a couple electives are kind of wonky, especially if that's because you're doing experiments, right? And you're having this beneficial system effect. But don't focus in on the couple negative side effects. Focus on the system. And one thing I learned, another term you hear thrown out, is I'm a systems thinker. And I actually took a systems dynamics class in grad school, and it was very mathematical. I got like a pity B minus. But one thing I learned from the prof was that, to optimize the whole, you may have to sub-optimize the parts. And I don't think a lot of people embrace to pick priorities. That means you must pick things you are deprioritizing. Otherwise, you don't have priorities. I don't think that is embraced enough.
I love that. I love that. And I think you're right. We can do things good. I'm reading a book right now I think it's called like From Good to Great. And I feel like a lot of times in higher ed, we're trying to go from bad to great, right? It's like, this is really bad. And we're trying to go all the way on the other side to great. But you're right. Like, what if the first goalpost was good? And then we can live in good for a little bit. And then we can move to great. That feels like a much smaller shift than bad to great.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm sure you'll say you're here to interview me, but even within your curriculum, right? Like, there's a first pass, there's a second pass, there's a learning, and sometimes you make a choice and you rule out other choices for the time being. So I get that, but can it just be a trajectory, like, in general?
Totally. So I have a question. When you come into a school and you're looking at their scheduling and the utilization of their classroom, does their approach, like, what does their approach reveal about institutional priorities? Can you learn about institutional priorities just by looking at how they utilize their space?
I think you can get some clues, right? There certainly can find the smoke. And two things I'd say. One is that in most or even all places, everybody's heart is in the right place, right? Like, most people in higher ed are there because they actually care, and that's great.
Yep.
But two things, I think. Here are two gaps that scheduling can reveal. One is a lack of shared specific concepts. What do we mean by inclusion? What do we mean by good teaching? What behaviors? This is good teaching, this isn't. Let's get specific, right? Allowing for the variation by like discipline and stuff. What is good utilization? What are our goals for a student's classroom experience? And including brightness, natural light, reverb off the walls. Most classrooms, another thing I'll sort of do is say, this is the seat count you have in this room, but this is the number of like instructionally appropriate seats, right? Which ones are too far away or at a weird angle, especially given like the amplification or like as they're carpeting. And, most classrooms, all the seats are not set up right. So one is concepts. Do we have shared specific concepts where we all talk about them for a second, right? And the second one is it's the execution, right? There are so many things pushing against good course scheduling at the institutional level, and they range. But and I'm just going to throw this one sin in there. It's really not even the only one, but departmental classrooms, right? We have this classroom for the math department, and you could come to me on bended knee with the worst sob story and no, you can't put an English class in here, right? Meanwhile, you look at the schedule and, oh, we have dissertations, defenses we need in this class. I'm like, how many PhDs do you guys crank out a year?
Yeah.
100? So anyway, and how many people go to their defenses? So, so I think that it's lack of shared concepts and shared goals, and shared and specific, and then it's the execution, which comes down in part to systems and processes, but also some of that the politics. And it's fixable. And one of the ways to fix it is that there's an information asymmetry between the end user and leadership, whether it's classrooms, other spaces. Nicole, you know what you need, and your dean, your CFO, your real estate space person sort of has to rely on what you tell them, right? They can try to vet, but they're not going to vet for everybody at the institution. And so how do you counter the claims of these stakeholders about what they need? I must have this kind of classroom. But there are ways through, including through the use of data. And again, sometimes as the consultant, I come in and I'm like, I have the bandwidth, right? You all could do this, but you are taking calls from parents who are mad about their kids' grades, right? With information and some other things, if you can chip away at that information asymmetry, in addition to like improving systems and processes and all, you can make, I've seen it done, real progress.
I'm so much in agreement here. And as I've read, Chris, I've read so many end of class surveys. I mean, hundreds, thousands of students at the end of class.
You should do a book on that.
Yeah, I really could. I have never seen a question around the classroom space. I see questions around your faculty. How was your faculty? How was correspondence with your faculty? Did your faculty make you feel like they belonged? How was the content? Was it too hard? Right? Like there's curriculum related questions. There's faculty related questions. Sometimes there's, the support systems on campus, right? Did you utilize Writing Center during this class? But have never seen a class ask about, or a survey ask about the physical space.
Yeah.
And what interesting,
and it's interesting.
Like that would be interesting. Go on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so I would start by addressing the skeptics. Oh, well, I've taken classes in such and such a room with cinder blocks and all that. And so have I. And, if it's a great prof, then they can probably overcome that classroom, assuming you can hear and so forth, right? And there's not, this is not even a fake example, like outbound sewage pipes going through that room, right? Because it was for whatever reason, right? So I get that some people would say, well, back in my day, but the reality is two things. One is in terms of three things: accessibility, pedagogical effectiveness. The room shapes teacher behavior. Fact. In many cases, if it's a course with group work, how the students are sitting impacts their interaction with each other. Proven, right? In many cases. And so there's that. And then I was going to say, and the other thing goes beyond just learning in the course, which, by the way, again, some students are going to be A students, some are not. But what if just 1% of your students, 5%, 10%, had their experience change because of a better classroom? That's over all the years that classroom exists, right? That is tremendous impact. That is tremendous ROI. But the other thing on top of like how they do in a specific course is, and the relationships they may build, right? They get to know somebody, which is a game changer. It's just their overall experience with the university, right? And you go in and maybe you feel unwelcome. Maybe you're first gen, demographically, and you have attributed characteristics that make you feel like you don't belong. What if just like being in a nice space for one or two of your classes, swank, really
Yeah.
cool space, bright, is just what kind of tips you into like, yeah, this is a nice place. Um, what percentage of students could be retained for that? Maybe it's 0.05 or maybe it's 3.
I love that so much. And I think about I had a class during my PhD, but it was with a bunch of master's students, and I call them little kids because they're little. They were still they're still very young adults. Um, and this was one of those classrooms that was just like what you described. It had flexible seating, it had a bean bag, it had, a bouncy ball that you could sit on, it had a space that was a little bit not as bright. Um, and those grad students would come in like exhausted from their day. It was a nighttime class, and they would just like find the area that they felt most related to their feelings in that moment, and they would just be like, "Oh, this is the 3 hours that I needed." And it's like, whoever says that about school? Whoever says this is the 3-hour 6 o'clock class that I needed, right? But like
Right.
that kind of aligns exactly with what you were saying is most people dread a nighttime class, 6 to 9. And these kids were like, oh my gosh, I needed this so much. I needed to just sit in this beanbag chair and, talk about student success in higher education, right? Like, I needed this.
And it's so true. And a lot of our classrooms and the furniture in them say to the student, come here, sit still, sit still,
Mhm.
don't move, and just like kind of receive. And other classrooms on the other end, and of course there's a whole spectrum, but it's like they say, hey, this classroom is for you to create. You're expected to be active here. And that often comes with more comfortable furniture. It reminds me of my second grade classroom. This is like a funny story. We had a little reading area in the back, and there were pillows and stuff. And but it was just like a fun spot that people could go to, And in that classroom, of course, the teacher might have a small reading group, and then everybody else is doing their own work. So you had this where you could have some students back there doing their own thing. Um, but we loved that space, and it was a couple pillows. It was cheap. And the one funny story is, although one time there was a student who fell asleep on that pillow and started snoring, and the best part is he ended up being a middle school principal. But yeah, those spaces. One of my dreams, I didn't get to do it at Rutgers. The pandemic kind of came along. Would be to, and you'll see this here and there, but it's not really narrated and it's not common. Is the option to stand. How about just
Mm.
a Starbucks or whatever, a local cafe height cafe table? Um, you put it in as a bonus, so nobody has to stand. But what if you want to? And what about fidgeting? Right? Does your furniture allow fidgeting for all of us? And some would say, especially for the neurodiverse, like you know, and there are chairs that allow you to rock a bit. I'm rocking now on a chair that's not supposed to rock, and if you were in this room, you'd hear it squeaking. But does that really happen in a tablet armchair? Like no, and it just flies in the face of science. So sorry, you got me going, but I couldn't agree with you more on what you're saying.
No, and I think that this is I think where so what most people don't know is I gave you a list of questions and I probably haven't asked any of them, but I think this conversation is really good. Um, so I think about you brought up your second grade classroom. My kids are in grade school, and so their teachers have one class that they get to like make their own, right? And so for some teachers, they did string lights across and they did bean bags, and they just made it like this cozy space. Others are like, it's going to be under the sea and it's going to feel cool. When you're a faculty, I mean, I have seen some faculty members have like, this is my classroom, I get to own it and make it, but I could be wrong. I don't feel like that's very common that it's like, this is my classroom as a professor. I never leave this classroom. I feel like it's a little bit of a traveling, I'm in this classroom now. Where I'm going with that is how, as a faculty, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I want to make my classroom space better for students, but you're just at the guise of whatever your institution hands you for that term, what kind of practical things can a faculty member start to do to start inching their way towards, I really want to be in control of, not control, that's not a great word, but I really want to utilize my classroom space and advocate for good classroom space and create good classroom space that
Mhm.
really helps facilitate learning. Like what can faculty do?
Sure. So I'd say at least three things. One is start to advocate at the institutional level for different kinds of classrooms. They can ping me or they can look it up. Pull down some images from wherever, and send them to your undergraduate program director. Start clamoring. We would like spaces such as these, right? And um, clamor. Ask. I was saying this the other day. One thing, and this is sort of a variation of it, but sometimes you just need to ask 100 times. That's all, right? Play the
That's it.
long game and ask. Give examples, and because really, even if it comes at a cost of furniture, they're still perpetually refreshing classrooms, right? Like furniture is going to wear out, and they're going to bring new stuff in, um, and then it's cheaper, right? Just maybe it's not as cheap, but unless you de-densify your classes, right? Maybe you make the classroom a little smaller, buy a little less furniture, right? But you just ask and say, look, a lot of universities have done this. Don't cry poor. You're spending money anyway, and just keep asking, and that's number one. I'll stop there. Number two is to find out which classrooms are available on your campus and request them. That is a huge gap. And schools that do a good job with this make their classroom stock visible online with 360 photos. But ask for the good classrooms. Ask and thank profusely when you get them. Say, this was a game changer. And then the last thing is whatever classroom you're put in, right? Because you can't, right? You're gonna even if you're teaching 5 classes a week, right? You can't do under the sea. And
Right.
you go in on the first day of school. It says Nicole on a desk, and you get to sit there and like put your stuff in there. And in my case, just load your desk up with junk.
Yeah.
In that same second grade classroom, I once anyway, the whole story about a messy desk. But whatever classroom you're in, own it, right? Narrate it, and and I think you have to couple that with intention, right? And say to students, hey, this is what I want you to do. And this is the space we're in together. And even if it's the worst space, say, listen, this is the worst space, right? But here's how we're going to make this space better.
Hmm.
Make the most of it despite the space. And so I think even if you end up in a dump, you have intentionality and trying to empower, right? That's my three-pronged approach for the faculty member.
I love that. I love that. I really like the idea of having like thinking of your classroom as inventory and being able to request it with pictures. At Kansas State for students, when you're requesting collaboration rooms, you literally log onto the Kansas State Collaboration Room website and it shows, here's the occupancy, here's pictures, here's where the TVs are on the wall, here's how the desks are configured. And so that if I'm trying to figure out if there's going to be a group in here, which of these collaboration rooms is the best, I get to pick and request that room. So I love the idea of doing that for your classrooms. Do schools do that?
I mean, you can request a classroom, from your department, who then logs that request with the central scheduling operation. But it depends on what the demand is. It depends on what time you want to teach, so forth. So
Have you seen
yeah.
any school that you feel like is doing this really well?
So I think that if you hold, putting aside the planning and design of classrooms, who does it well in terms of allocating? And because what will happen, let's say you have some of your classrooms that are nicer than others, um, and there's more demand than supply. Ideally, what would happen is that there's some classes need or would benefit from those rooms more than others, right? Or maybe you want to spread them across, spread the wealth. And how do you do that? How do you keep an active learning room just from being used by somebody who likes the nice furniture, but they're
Mhm.
not going to adapt their pedagogy? And I'll say one thing I did at Rutgers, just to, I think this was a good example, is this. Because now I had a great, amazing staff there, scheduling staff, who I didn't need to at all, like, babysit on a daily or even weekly basis or monthly. So I could go out in the university, right, and get to meet people, listen, go to brown bags, and so start to understand, right? Because some of it is people don't know what to ask for, but if the central person can be empowered or has the interest to learn about and then offer what hasn't been asked for, that's huge. And so what I did when we started having active learning classrooms was there were a few early movers who had been asking for them for years, but then it's like, okay, well, we need like 20 other courses. We did two things. One was longer range. We created the Rutgers Active Learning Community. We knew that we had to train folks, raise awareness, incentivize them, and say, why don't you consider teaching in a classroom like this? And there are major universities who have active learning rooms that fail to launch. It happens. And I can tell you the Rutgers Active Learning Community was a relatively low budget endeavor. And frankly, it was four of us that really just cared. And we spent some time, there's a web page. Maybe we spent, this is on top of the furniture. We spent maybe $5,000 a year, like for a symposium and a couple other things. And this is like a school of like 40,000 students, right?
Yeah.
So we had the training, but what I did as director of scheduling, and this is where, hopefully your scheduling person is not just is empowered and asked to care about the teaching quality at the university, right? In a real active way. They'd all say, we care, and they do, but in an active way, right? Is when we started that semester, we had the active learning rooms. We had our first movers who were in there. We needed 20 more classes. And because I knew the course schedule, I'm like, okay, well, it's a 54-person room. We're going to run a report, all courses from 40 to 54 people. And I at least could come close to finding the courses that would do well in there, right? And sometimes it was courses that were had mathematical problems, right? Econometrics or math courses, right? Those are sort of easy courses to put an active learning element in. But also it was getting out there and, even though we did focus at first on social research methods, right? In the sociology department, the psychology department, not just STEM. But also pretty quickly, we had like one of our biggest users was the Latino and Caribbean Studies department, who had very qualitative classes. I think that just happened because we were so plugged in. You must merge your facilities with your mission people, and not in general, not in their hearts, not on a glossy piece of paper or some state of the university speech. Like, okay, I intentionally sounding skeptical there. I mean, in their daily knowledge and behaviors and incentives. It has to happen. And I think it doesn't happen, but it can, and which is great. It can happen with some effort.
Something as you were talking that it kind of got brought up to me in my brain. I think we communicate a lot to students too with these spaces, right? Like not only to faculty are we communicating things, but I think of a school that I went to that I visited. Their engineering had a beautiful glass building, great furniture, swanky fireplace. Their College of Leadership had a Starbucks in the lobby, and business school had NASDAQ, things on the wall. And then you go to College of Education, and it's a crumbled building with no windows and like what feels like all the old furniture from the rest of the university. Like that has to communicate things to students, like about the institutional priorities and which students does the status of the building or the classrooms communicate the priority level that they have for those types of students? Or you know what I mean? Like it's kind of crazy.
It is, and I think I come off, I don't mean to come off as strident here, but I welcome others debunking what I'm claiming, right? Big time. But I think if you ask most provosts, is there even access across your student body to your best spaces, they would say, I don't know. Or they would guess, yeah, our business and engineering students, right? But even within that, like they might guess that because those are often the nicest buildings. But they wouldn't really know. They don't know. So, okay, end of conversation. They don't know there's a problem, or they're not embracing there's a problem, right? Or they might have an answer when you ask them. These are the environments where students are spending, what are they, 5, 10, 20 to 30 hours, like, of their lives per week in these classes. And you're telling me you can't give me a back of the envelope guess on equity of access to like your best spaces? And by the way, it would take you about a half an hour in your data warehouse to answer that question, right? Or maybe 10 hours, but half hour to come up with the first path. And they don't. So, and then others would say, okay, well, the business engineering, maybe a data science student, they have got the best, we're competing for them. Or there was a donor who said, hey, it's a donation. And to that, I would say, well, two things. Number one, yeah, business school, you raised the funds and so forth. But guess what? You're on university land. University staff is going to plan your building design, help design your building with the consultant. They're going to run your building. So it's not totally yours. It's not, right? And I've seen one donor once, so have a stipulation where only such and such courses could be in this building. And I'm like, I suspected the academic unit was like, oh, okay, yeah, well, you can put that stipulation in, which is pretty unacceptable, like I could see giving them dibs. But so you have your donors, say, well, our donors are demanding it. And the answer is like, okay, well, it's not just your building, and you gotta give 10%, right? 15% to others. But the other thing I'd say is these students are all paying the same money, right? More or less. They are paying the same amount of money. And they are not getting the same experience. In what world does that wash?
It's so true. They're like, but listen, Chris, there's cookies in the student union, okay? We're giving them cookies today.
You ask me all these good questions that get me ranting, but so I should cut myself off, but you're so right. Yeah.
Go eat your cookies. Don't mind your crumbling building. It's fine. Everything is fine.
Yeah.
I always make a joke, like for the example I gave, the College of Ed. I'm like, are they just preparing them for the teacher world? Are they just saying like, you're going to be a teacher? Here you go. We're just going to prepare you while you're in college that you're not going to get the glitz and the glam. You're going to get this subpar building that leaks most days of the week.
It's like it's a test.
We don't want you to get too comfortable in college because the real world's out there, guys. So, okay, so we talked about...
Hey, they should have them...
No, go on.
I was going to say they should, why not go all in on that approach and have them eat at a worse dining hall? Like, USDA grade D, but edible cheese. I mean, like, let's really prep them for their teaching careers.
Totally. All right, so we talked about faculty and kind of what they can do, and I loved those ideas. I think you gave some like at a high level for faculty, but then also really tactile. Like I think about even one of my faculty members brought snacks. She had like a tote and she brought snacks, right? And that just didn't physically touch the space, but it just made the space more chill. So I think your ideas for faculty are great. From a university level, so let's say you're a provost listening to this. Where might they start if they're like, Chris gave me some things to think about here. And I actually don't have a pulse on campus utilization within my, or space utilization within our school. Where should they start?
Sure. And I think change is possible. Absolutely. And the first thing I would say is, space is just one lever in the student experience and the teacher or faculty experience, right? And so let's say just for teaching, you have the classroom, you have the LMS, you have instructional design and faculty development, faculty support. And not just the LMS, you have other kinds of software that could shape the student experience. And you have the space, right? And the different dimensions of the space itself. paint on the walls, rug on the floor, lighting, and so forth. And so how many seats you cram into it, right? Like, is it up to fire code, or do you go a little lower than that? So you have all these levers, and I think it's thinking of which levers bring you the most results, right? And my dream is to do an analysis with a CFO one day to say, you have these buckets of expenditures. What's the ROI of the next dollar in each bucket, right? If I gave you and of course it's all situated and there's marginal benefits. It's complicated. You're not actually going to come up with a real number, but you can come up with like principles and guideposts. And so, like, if I gave you, Nicole, $500,000, would you hire 2 instructional designers and get some new furniture? Would you get all new furniture? And again, and the way the budget works is it's like, no, we got money for capital funding, right? Capital, or we have a new line. But I think you do have to think of the budget holistically, even if in practice you might have things come in different ways with different stipulations. That's what the CFO's job is, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think of it holistically. Do you deprioritize? You say, listen, we are going to have dumpier spaces, but we're going to just like focus on better AV. Like we are sub-optimizing. So you have to think of that as the field on which you're making your decisions, right? And then what I would then do is to say this: find out how good your classrooms are, right? There's different scales you can use. Hire somebody, maybe they work with your students to make it cheaper. Go catalog the quality of your classrooms, and maybe add in some questions on the course reviews, right? Qualitative feedback that objective measures won't get. Then you have your classroom typology, and then you just overlay course scheduling and student registration data, and you start to understand what the experience is. And then you can say, okay, well, through scheduling or through renovations, you do some scenario planning, you run simulations simply, and you start to have an idea of like where you can move the ball. And some to the extent it's just scheduling, it's very cheap. That's my advice.
I love that. It's such a like stair-stepped approach. I love this idea of thinking about your classrooms in terms of inventory and the different ways in which you would be able to classify them, to where when a faculty needs a classroom, you have this bank of inventory. And I'm a big person. I like the concept of fit is really important to me. In my world, it's instructional designers and faculty and how they fit together. But I could also see a world in which the type of classroom it is, like the physical space, and then the type of teaching and learning, right? Where's the fit there to make sure that it's more just like a one-to-one? Like, can we classify the types of classes and then link those to the types of actual physical spaces so that as we're scheduling this, it just becomes pretty routine and not this huge puzzle?
Yeah. No, it can. And to use the example of active learning classrooms, because you might say, well, can't you just push the desks together and create a 4-person pod? Like, yeah, you could, I guess. But the reality is we're humans, we're emotional, we're animals, right? I don't know if you know, there's a woman named Susan Rock, Hrach, and people can just Google her, but she talks a lot about embodied cognition, embodied learning, and what signals are you sending? And we're emotional, right? We're not that far removed from the forest or the jungle, and it's like we have emotions and there's momentum, right? It's so easy to fall off. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I haven't got a resolution, and like, oh, yeah, okay, no, like let's hit that, and let's make it part of our culture, and not just in this, oh, we're going to have a culture of this. Like, no, like we're going to have a culture of this because we have good classrooms. We're assigning them intentionally. We're picking out a subset of places we're going to apply it because we can't do it everywhere yet. And we are serious about this. Prove to me you're serious about your teaching. I used to say about some universities, people here or there say they care about their teaching, but do they really care? Show me. And so it's like, that's where you need to take it really seriously and have this approach, and to know that it's not just a technical question, right? It's an emotional question. It's a change question.
Absolutely. And I mean, I always, so one of my things with like teaching strategies is kindness is a teaching strategy. Like I will die on this hill that just the basic principle of being kind is a really effective way to teach, right? To give your students respect and to just be a good human to them and not a jerk, right? And I now think you kind of have added this layer to me of almost like hospitality. Like when people come to my house, I want to make sure that my fridge has their favorite drinks and that I have food out, you know, little hors d'oeuvres, and that my house is comfortable and that it's clean and that there's a place for them to kick their feet up, right? Like, because you're coming into my
Mm-hmm.
house and I care about you. And I think what you're ultimately saying is we can do that with our students through the way we utilize our classes. We can be unreasonably hospitable to our students just through proper classroom and space utilization.
Yeah. And I love your example. And I've thought of that too. And again, neither of us is trying to oversimplify it, and this would be for accessibility too. Um, what do I do? How do I this, that? And it's like, what would you do if you had a party? You'd make everybody there had something to eat.
Yep.
That's all. That's all. Right.
Yeah. You grab a bag of chips at the bare minimum.
And I'm a vegetarian, and I was back in the day before it was popular. And hey, I used to have to, and I was fine, and if I had to eat, you know, uh, peanut butter and jelly or something like, or less. So I sort of, like that's my cross to bear, right? Not having to eat the same spread as others, but yeah, it's just a matter of like, but yet it's easy to make vegetarian food. You just have to know to make it
That's true.
and want to.
That's true. And I think, something we obviously haven't talked about is online. But I think as we're talking about these principles of ground classrooms, right, we can apply the same approach online, right? Just through LMS design, through our messaging within the LMS, how we set up the LMS. Is it simple for students? Are the things that they need?
Mm-hmm.
One time I had a class and I was starting the class, and I kid you not, Chris, I spent an hour trying to find the readings, and they were tucked away in the discussion forums. All the PDFs, all the scanned in PDFs from a textbook, I will add that, were tucked in the discussion forums. So after an hour, I'm like, I don't know where my readings are, right? Same concept here. It's like, think about a student coming into your digital classroom. How can you make them feel invited, welcomed? How can you utilize the technology there to really promote effective teaching and learning? Like, it's the same. It's just digital.
Yeah, no, and I think that as we go increasingly to digital, modes and with online and hybrid students, and that includes an increasing number of students who are on campus either as residents or commuters who maybe have 3 of their 10 classes a year that are hybrid or remote. And so it's like, it's more important. Our digital lives in general are expanding, and we should like do this. I'm going to say it publicly. Like, we should find a school that will allow us to do a long session with its students but with faculty and staff there too, where they sketch out their digital life, right?
Mm.
And the digital spaces they're in. And are those digital spaces clear? Are they coherent? Um, and those are spaces that the school serves up, but that maybe also they are doing on their own. And it's kind of like saying, here's your classroom. By the way, it's a maze to get to the front door. Like, we would never do that. Oh, well, actually, some buildings do. But anyway, we wouldn't want
Yeah.
to do that. And so it's like, what's the digital ecosystem that the students are in? And again, you're balancing effectiveness with trade-off, et cetera. And you're thinking of like, the students' cognitive, their social, their connection. Even in, someone named Flower Darby, who's out your way, she's the University
Mm-hmm.
of Missouri, and others, she would hasten to note, talk about good asynchronous teaching.
Yep.
It has to be intentional. So again, everything you've asked, I just could say, yes, you're right, but I'm of course adding in my thoughts. And And this all can be done even in a school where people are busy, overworked, reeling, certainly in the past year, from the instability of the policy environment and the fiscal environment. It's doable. It's doable to make some improvement, you know?
Yep.
Really think that.
I have loved this. We're almost at time. I have one more question for you, and I did not prep you with this question. All
Good.
right. We have been in higher ed for a long time. We've learned a lot of lessons working in higher ed, right? What's probably, and you can think about this for a second, what's one of the biggest lessons you've learned, not even related to what we're talking about? Like, what's one of your biggest lessons learned in higher ed?
So I think that, and if you asked a bunch of university staff members to complete the following sentence, and that sentence is, if I have a good idea or an idea for something new, I would blank. What would they do? Who would they go to? And I think at most institutions, for most staff members, there is not a good answer to that question.
Hmm.
And you think of all the different routes somebody could go to with an innovative idea to their boss, right? Their boss might say, not today. They might steal the idea or somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And so we have these innovative ideas. And I think what we need to do, and I said this previously too, is like, we need to make it a priority to experiment and to learn about our institution. You know, a KPI for the year should be, did you try anything new this year? We're not asking about if it succeeded. Did you try anything new? You have to. You're allowed to. You have permission to. And innovation often has to be done, but it's subsumed under these other criteria, right? And which includes keeping the lights on and getting students with their diploma in hand. And if it's a means to an end, it's got to be an end. Otherwise, we're going to sit around and scratch our heads and say, why aren't we more innovative? It's like, because it was a second tier priority.
Yeah.
And that is, one of my secret ideas is to some too many ideas, too little time, right? And you got to keep focus on your core thing, which for me is space, classrooms, scheduling. But it's to create a program for like guerrilla innovation teams, right? You get 15, 20 people from university together, different staff members, enrollment management, advising, athletics, whatever. Have them come in, have them learn, have them work on a problem, have them come up with an idea. It's a great connection, helps with job mobility around the university, and maybe some good ideas come out of it. Like, where's the infrastructure for change?
Yeah.
Is it just pronouncements by new presidents and annual reports where they cherry pick the things they did that sound good? Again, I think higher ed actually truly is innovative, but is it as innovative as it could be? And that's the bar.
I think the answer is no. Hot take. I think the answer is no. I think there's too much governance for it to be as innovative as it could be. But I think you're right that the spirit is there, but sometimes there's hurdles that, there's a lot of weapons in higher ed, like accreditation, right? Accreditation is like one of the most weaponized. Anyone can shoot down a good idea with the threat of accreditation. And I think most people just don't understand accreditation enough to know. They're like, oh, you said the A word? Okay, my idea sucked, right? When really it probably was a good idea that an accreditor would love, but that person doesn't have enough awareness about the accreditor themselves to be able to defend, like, no, I think an accreditor would love this. They just hear someone on the other side say, no, an accreditor, that's not going to work for accreditation purposes. And then the conversation stops. Like, dead stop.
Right. Yeah.
So I think
and
you're right.
accreditation really, is yeah, no, sorry. Yeah. And I think accreditation actually is not as cut and dried as some people think it is, right? I mean, there are certain sins you can't commit, but Yeah. Come on, live a little, live a little.
Totally. I read a really good book, Connecting the Dots of
And the answer is
Accreditation.
yes. Ooh, okay.
So it actually really changed my mind a lot about accreditors and how it kind of frames how what used to be just like I don't know, we're going way off topic here, but it really used to be this like checkbox list, this checklist, right? Do you have a sufficient library with X amount of publication databases, right? Do you have this? Do you have this? And it was just like a check, 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 check. Well, a lot of the for-profits came along and they're like, oh, we have mega cash. We can just buy our way. We can buy all the databases, right? And now we're great in the eyes of accreditors. And so it really paints a story of now how the accreditors want to know like more of the story. Like, sure, you have all the databases, but based on your program types, are those databases actually relevant to your nursing students, right? Or do your resources make sense for your student versus just did you throw money at your support staff? And so it really, I think, just paints a good picture of how accreditation just isn't this like black and white box that it used to be. It's about your student and how are you serving them in a meaningful way? But again, we live in this very like, don't say the A word. Don't say the A word.
Yeah.
You're going to stop conversation if you say the A word. So yeah, I would read this book
There's
if you.
definitely a lot of fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I will. I think. Sadly, I find it interesting. Not just kidding. I would choose to read about that in my leisure time.
Oh, I did a presentation on accreditation, and at the end, one of the students in the class was like, "I think I love accreditation now." I'm like, oh, "Great." But they were so confused that they said it. They said, "I think I really love accreditation now. I'm kind of confused that that's coming out of my mouth." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. This was such a good conversation, probably, to be honest, one of my favorites. I think you gave a lot of inspirational points of view, but I think you also gave some really tactile things that admin can do, faculty can do, for us to really start figuring out how we can better utilize our space and why we should, right? Because you say space utilization and everyone's like, yeah, I don't care about that. But I think
Yeah.
you certainly have made me realize how important it is.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the invitation. And I think, our only hope really is to make sure that things like space and operations are really in conversation with curriculum and other things. You know, uh, another way to put this in closing is like, and this is just one angle on it, is your spaces, your operations should be pushing change. They shouldn't be barriers to change. But I think that conversation comprehensively, holistically, is our only hope. So thank you.
I love that. Thank you so much, Chris. And to everyone listening, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.